to that.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution, sponsored by Jointflows. Today we're joined by Craig Bryant. How are you?
Hey guys, yeah, I'm good, thanks. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Craig is an experienced and a bit of an expert in all things sales and go-to-market related, and currently is co-founder of Clevenue, an interesting new solution on the market as well. Anything you want to add to the introduction here, Craig?
Yeah, nice to meet you guys. Thanks for having me on. Super excited for the next 30 minutes or so. And we're going to put the world to rights.
There you go. Brilliant. So let's jump straight into it then. I guess, one of the points that we usually start in is how the landscape has changed. And actually, we were just speaking about that offline before we started recording, and how the sales process has changed, how much harder it is and so forth as well. And I guess one of the parts that comes into that, or where it all begins, is how you start planning, how you're going to achieve your goals, what those targets should be, etc. as well. How are you seeing that change with the change in times as well?
I think the thing about it that's funny is that you're not seeing it change. People are still approaching planning the same way now as they did 3 years ago, as they did 6 years ago, as they did 10 years ago. And kind of since like the real rapid expansion we've seen like within the B2B and especially like the SaaS community, it's all spreadsheet based, and we're working in these spreadsheets to build plans, and we're saying that we're going to have, we have like single factors that sort of kind of compute into each other and create a model of some sorts. And at the end, you spit out a number that says, this is the revenue we're going to hit in this year. And it's something that people do once a year, roughly around like November time, which is not always a good time to be doing it because we're getting to the real like the sort of crunch time of Q4. And so it's a task that's done very poorly in general because of the tooling that people have, and also because actually like the reason why companies plan, why they tell themselves why they plan, and actually why they have to plan are two very different things. They plan because it's like they think is that okay, I'm a revenue leader, I need to go and I need to hit this number, and I need to know what resource I need to do that and how I'm going to get there, and these are my steps on the ladder to get me to my number. The real reason that we have to come up with go-to-market plans is because we need to be able to make promises to investors in most cases, right? Especially in VC or private equity-backed businesses. And we need to make our plan add up to a certain number to satisfy those investors. And that creates some problems because those outside interests don't necessarily match up to the reality of a business. And that can be problematic. So companies still do it that way. And that's also one of the reasons why I think you've seen like this huge shift in how sales has become in B2B for like the last 18 months. And also is a reason why a lot of layoffs have happened. And it's a real shame. And it's really having a negative effect on the market. And that's why we're trying to fix that at Clevenue.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about plans being made once a year typically. From my experience, what I've seen is a difficulty for businesses to adjust to macroeconomic factors. So, things like a recession or potential recession, depending on how you look at it. Even back when COVID, first came about and became a thing. And it was the ability for businesses to adjust expectations, which they struggled with. And as a result, obviously, a byproduct is you just have salespeople who are missing targets by miles and miles. What kind of positive experiences have you seen with businesses who have been able to adjust, and how they've gone about doing that?
Positive experiences where people are adjusting. So like, I think where in our experience, so I guess maybe to explain briefly, like Clevenue is essentially a platform to enable leaders, especially revenue leaders, to do this, like to make plans in a more dynamic, sort of flexible, intelligent way without spreadsheets. And in our experience so far, in the plans that we're building with our design partners today and some of our early customers, it's where they're looking at possible scenarios. So like you mentioned, like COVID, we didn't necessarily appreciate at the time, I think, like after that initial dip in productivity, that huge boom that like the whole SaaS industry felt, like funding went crazy. Like 2021 was like the best year ever to be in B2B SaaS. We didn't appreciate that. That could have gone two ways, right? And essentially, like what we're trying to do is create that optionality in planning. It's like, okay, so we think that the market can go this way. What happens to our sales cycle in this scenario where it goes down? Things are more maybe sort of like a negative economic environment. Things slow down, average order value decreases, prospecting efficiency drops. Like, what does that mean for our business? And where does that leave us in 3, 6, 9, 12 months? We're trying to provide for sort of visibility on that versus like, well, actually, things are going to turn around in the next 6 months economically. And maybe we should start thinking about, like, we're seeing like an early uptick in average order value, even if other numbers are not evolving so positively. What does that mean for our business? And being able to just create these two outcomes and to sort of show where you end up in both is a really powerful device for decision making, and ultimately allows people to like build out better plans that reflect the reality more. Because like with most planning, right, you do it at the end of November or sort of around November time. It's a mad rush, like we were talking about. It's Q4. You've got so many other things on your mind, and ultimately, it's not an exercise that creates any value for a sales leader. It just satisfies those outside interests. And by the time it comes around to January, you're already like, 2 weeks in, you're probably already behind because of various different factors, but creates a lot of tension in the business, and you're chasing your tail for the rest of the year, and it's just catch up. And that's kind of a horrible way to live. So yeah, we hate that.
Yeah, no,
I've seen the platform, and I was mind blown by its capabilities. But I think as a leader, I've experienced capacity planning and I've experienced headcount planning as a leader and as an individual contributor. And it felt like it was always reactive, and it was always too late as well. So there's being reactive and reactive in time, and then there's being reactive and reactive too late, basically. But what was really surprising was the collateral damage that was generated by that on AEs, on first line managers, on people that are closer to the actual deals and the field. What's your take on this, Craig?
So I think like you're talking about like the environment it creates for like individual salespeople. And I think we were talking about it before the call a little bit, but like it makes it really, really hard. It makes it harder than it has ever probably been to work in B2B sales, because of that pressure, and almost like the problem of revenue gets put on that person's shoulders. And you often are then set unachievable targets. You probably don't have sufficient like enablement inside your business to help you hit those numbers. And maybe there are some people that have been in your business longer, or that have got some track record, or they've got some tenure somehow that you do see doing better. But like it creates environments where most people probably are underachieving. But then even like more on like a mental health level for like an individual rep, it's like, am I bad at my job? Why am I failing? And it's like, I've had those moments, and maybe you guys have as well, where it's like, what is wrong with me? And it's because the numbers that I was being asked to do at just certain points in my career were like impossible. And I've by the way, I think like there was a shift in that in like the last 5 years versus the previous 5 years. And like I look at like attainment throughout my career, and this is part of like a trend where it's just got harder and harder and harder. Salespeople always joke about like the numbers going up and things becoming more and more difficult, but it's reached such a point now where it's like where does it end? And it translates to when they don't inevitably hit those numbers, creates things like layoff rounds, and people lose their jobs, and that creates real pressure in your life because you can't pay your rent, you can't pay your mortgage, and like it's not why any of us go into sales. It really like is disappointing to see. I don't know if you guys have sort of got anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've been in situations where I've seen targets for reps being given out halfway through Q2. So, we're talking almost half the year through.
Yeah.
You actually know what your target is. And the issue with that is the ability to understand, you argue all sales reps should be working at maximum capacity all the time. But the reality is you need to be able to plan. You need to be able to do some forward planning, working back from specific numbers. And when you don't have the ability to do that, more often than not, you're going to fall short because you don't actually know what you're doing. So yeah, I've seen it and I've experienced it as well. But while we're talking about planning and making sure, what you were saying is that targets are becoming harder and harder to attain. And you're seeing that for a multitude of different reasons. Who should be involved in the planning process? which teams or stakeholders need to be involved to ensure that the team has the ability to work cohesively to develop the target first to begin with, but then the strategy behind that to achieve it?
So I think a lot of it depends on the size of the business and like stage of development, right? Speaking more generally, so assuming like, you know, company with, say, Series A, B-ish, you will probably have like a senior revenue leader in the business at that point. And that person is kind of like, in our opinion, is like the key stakeholder in this whole picture, because it is, to all intents and purposes, their number at the end of the day. But they're also a bit of they're also sort of in a weakened position because they have a bunch of other people saying that, you know, sort of around them from their team saying the number needs to come down, and they have the people sort of that they work for, their founders, their bosses, the investors, the board saying the number needs to come up. And so this person's like being stretched and pulled in two separate, you know, completely separate directions. Typically, I'd say, you know, you have involvement from those higher up sort of like stakeholders, so founding team, rest of the C-suite. Often like finance comes into play as well, more and more obviously RevOps if you have that team, and they can sort of be there to provide a lot of answers and insights from you know, real life data that a company probably has. But really for me it depends on that single stakeholder, that sales leader's ability. And because this is all done in Excel and spreadsheets generally, a lot of it also is tied to actually their ability, like their fluency and how good they are at working in a spreadsheet, and their ability to interpret and break those models and understand where the line in the sand is drawn between what is achievable and what is just pure fantasy, and being able to call out bad assumptions that are being made. I can talk about an example that we had recently actually where it was Alex was speaking to one of our design partners end of last year, and you know, this was sort of as the market was starting to slow down, and they'd noticed, this was second half of last year, from like end of H1 through to the end of H2, they noticed that their conversion rate had dropped from like 12 down to like just under 6% in like 6 months, and sort of it done it in steps. And the guy had been given his top down number, and he was looking at his plan, and he realized that the conversion rate that they were assuming in the plan was 25%. So it was based on doubling the number that they had earlier in the year.
Okay.
And then, but actually, and they were like, okay, we just need to get that back up to the level it was. It's like, the level it is now is only 25% of that. And we advise really, really strongly against like this plan being feasible when we were, you know, just giving this guy advice and trying to interpret his plan, because that's what we were doing with the platform at the time. Anyway, and at end of H1 of this year comes around, guy hits 25-ish% of his target. And, you know, it's that exact translation of, you expect this much, you know, conversion rate, but actually it's 4 times less. You only get 25% of your number. The economics literally just like stacked up perfectly. It was pretty much the exact reason they fell short.
Goodness, yeah, I think it's so important when you're in that position to have the ability to effectively upward manage as well as you can downward manage, or if that's the right term. So yeah, but I've seen well.
But one of the, I think that's such a good point. But like one of the things you need, in order to be able to do that is like a proof, like a story, and like you need data, because that's like everyone needs data these days to ask for that, to canvas for those extra resources and everything. And most of the time, those revenue leaders just don't have it. It's not available to them. So that's one of the reasons why like we're doing what we're doing, because it's to give them that. And hopefully that's a change we can facilitate.
And from your experience, Craig, how far in advance and how often should you be revising and reviewing the planning that you're making?
Mm-hmm. I think the plan should be looking at performance in real time, pretty much all the time, like kind of in the background. So we should be mapping conversion rates, deal sizes, all these kind of metrics, where they are today into the future, and seeing how they're evolving over time, and planning on that kind of basis. You know, because if, like what we were talking about, if that number changes, conversion rate changes from 12% to 6%, that has like an impact on so many other parts of like the revenue function and what it has to deliver, that we, you know, it creates a bunch of initiatives that we need to focus on. So we need to be aware of all of those things and kind of like have almost like a dashboard in front of us of how those numbers are tracking over time. So like we're big advocates of continuous planning, without being in there every single day, but more like just checking the pulse every week, every couple of days to make sure that we're still in line, that we're still on track. You know, the idea is to minimize the gap between, you know, what you're actually planning for and reality, because at the moment it's just astronomical.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's been a bit of a hype around forecasting tools and the ability to actually see into the future. And, you know, fast forward 2 years, and actually all these companies are now laying people off, right? So like they expect it, was it part of the plan, or are the forecasting tool unable to actually forecast? What's your view on that versus planning?
I'm torn because like I've used pipeline forecasting tools a lot in the past and found them really helpful. And I think part of the reason that I've found it helpful is because the process you go through to create a forecast as like a, you know, a frontline manager, especially, because it gives you visibility on every single deal. You have to kind of go through everything with a fine-tooth comb in order to come out with a good like a forecast that you feel reasonable about and confident about at the other side. I think how forecasts tend to be wrapped up now, pipeline forecasts tend to be wrapped up is to me kind of misses the mark a little bit in terms of like why we're doing it. Because, and I actually got an ad the other day for a forecasting platform, and it was like the tagline was something like know where you're going to finish this quarter. And I was reading that and I was like, you know, like as salespeople, you know, you have like that gut feel that we're gonna hit, we're gonna be short, we're gonna be this much short, or we're gonna overachieve by 5-10%, whatever the scenario is at that time. Like I know where I'm gonna be this quarter. Like even without reading through a forecast and looking at things on a deal by deal basis, you just get that feeling. And the reason that most companies do a forecast, I think, is not because they need that visibility, because most of the time they have it. It's to be able to say to those people with outsiders with an interest in the business, oh, we're going to hit this number. And so I think like part of the reason with it that people are working on it so much is like it's kind of misguided. It's not serving sales teams as much as it should be. It's serving other people in and out of the organization. My take is that ultimately forecasting is only as useful for as long as your sales cycle is. You know, so if you have a 3 month forecast, 3 month sales cycle, I think your forecast is good for 3 months. It doesn't enable you to plan resource 6, 9, 12 months in the future. And when you think about like the lead time on hiring, ramping new reps, launching new products, entering into new territories, it's way longer than that. And so it's impossible to do those things and achieve the sort of desired commercial results just based on a forecast alone. You need to have visibility better than the current quarter. You know, that's what's changed, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you overachieve or if you underachieve, you're just as bad. You know, what you're looking for is accuracy when you come to forecast. Yeah. I've seen VPs get absolutely slated for absolutely smashing their number at the same time as I have when they've absolutely missed their number as well. So being accurate is extremely important. But while we're speaking about being accurate, it's the data behind it that allows you to be as accurate as you can be as well. So when we're talking about the integrity of data itself, how can you go about making sure you've got a good baseline to begin with? Because I guess that's needed right at the offset to begin with, even when we're thinking about planning.
I think, again, like a huge part of this depends on the maturity of your business, right? So like, and the kind of assumptions that you're making. For me, that's the data hygiene that goes into planning. Actually, the bar isn't as high as we anticipated it being actually when we first started building Clevenue. Because I think in general, across like a pipeline, you know, it's relatively easy to do the cleanup you need to get a really solid view on conversion rate, on deal size, and to split that by segments and verticals and, you know, product lines and stuff like that. That's relatively straightforward. I think where real damage is done and where things get really, the mistakes start to creep in is like where we start making bad assumptions about how much we're going to increase conversion rate and who's responsible for that is the next thing. So like the hygiene is definitely important, but within that sort of overarching like data governance piece, hygiene is one factor, but also like reasonable sort of ambition is, you know, another one to consider entirely. So like not assuming your conversion rate is going to double, you know, from 12% to 25% in a market that is showing every sort of indicator that it's not going to do that. And without tying any kind of project or initiative to make that happen. Like if you're just saying, yeah, we're going to double average order value, or is that related to a price increase? How are we training reps to do that? What timings are we giving them? What guidelines are we giving them for opportunities that are already in their pipeline? That thought just doesn't go into it. It just becomes the salesperson's problem. Go deal with it. Get me more revenue. Yeah. And it's just like, it never works. Never ever works.
Yeah, it's the why and the how.
I've seen that firsthand when Hitesh was leading a team. It was completely messy. There's a big obviously focus on AI and all of these tools. Like I'm not getting into the ChatGPT conversation, but
okay, good.
With planning, how much do you think should be led by AI versus manual input?
I was having this conversation with someone who is actually building an AI product yesterday, and I think where you're dealing in numbers and facts, I think AI can be really powerful. So like, for example, asking, and you know, we have ambitions about how AI plays a part in Clevenue in the future, but like that's not part of the offering today. We're not trying to, you know, we're not trying to ride that wave right now, because like we're just kidding ourselves, I think, if we do. But like at least where it can help right now is like, or something along those lines, is like providing people guardrails around what is a reasonable assumption, what is not a reasonable assumption. So like, and you know, basically just saying like we think that increasing conversion rate by 5% over the course of 12 months is a reasonable goal versus 25% being unreasonable. And I think for those kind of sort of like more straightforward calculations, I think it is already at the like point where it can deliver on that sort of thing. I think for like spitting out like fully built out annual plans, I think there's just too much nuance in it right now. Like I'm saying that as like a total non-expert in AI, but having, you know, broken so many GTM plans in the last year and like gone through them and sort of dissected all these spreadsheets, like there's way too much in there for an AI right now to be able to sort of understand today, as far as I can see it, unless someone really like dedicated a bunch of time doing that. That's ultimately maybe somewhere we want to go. But right now it's something that people have to do. And I think AI is more like an assistant, you know, so how other platforms are positioning it right now. It's like, it helps you with part of the job. It doesn't do the entire job for you.
Yeah. Right. And something you touched on, Craig, which I thought was really interesting. You spoke about obviously planning, and you spoke about planning being essentially a multi-departmental activity where you have to have the buy-in from sales enablement, you have to have the buy-in from RevOps, sales, obviously. Like, what do you feel like is the best recipe for success versus failure?
In terms of like buying other departments in?
Yeah, and where does it start? How do you orchestrate that? Because it's very complex.
So I think it when it comes to planning and like you're looking to like for change initiatives, probably growth initiatives like we're talking about here, there needs to be like one of the main things is like ownership. Like who is responsible for this and what does this project take to succeed? And that's, you know, without talking too much about the platform, about Clevenue, there is this idea of like tying those outcomes, that increase in conversion rate, to specific projects at a time, to specific initiatives, and saying, you know, and like basically working with other stakeholders in your business to say, okay, what budget is this going to take? who's going to be responsible for it, who's going to be driving it, and who else needs to be involved. And aligning a business around, and also not doing too much of it at once, right? Like not having 20 projects on the go, because I think too many people in too many companies are all doing too much, like in terms of projects, and most projects don't lead anywhere in most companies. And so I think having a focus on one or two things like that at any given time is a better way to achieve outcomes in the long term than spreading yourself too thinly. And I think that is a problem for sales leaders, because they know that every one of these metrics, these kind of core metrics, you know, sales cycle, deal size, conversion rates, these are all big, like you need to have a handle on all of them at all times. And that creates a lot of pressure, because like you have to be doing things to support all of those numbers moving in a positive direction. And if you can create space for yourself to just focus kind of on one at a time, I think your ability to impact that number is going to be way better than it is if you're spreading yourself too thinly across three.
Awesome. And I guess you mentioned you've been someone who's been fortunate enough to break down lots of go-to-market plans now, just based on obviously the research you're doing for your own product and so as well. And so I'm guessing you've seen some horrific plans, but at the same time, I'm guessing you've seen some really good plans as well. What's the makeup of a very strong go-to-market plan look like?
Anything that provides optionality, anything that can let you look at multiple scenarios at once and not just assuming that a year goes one way, and something that you can easily write over. It's like the bar is like so high, it's like almost impossible to create a long comprehensive plan in a spreadsheet. Like we've seen good examples and we've definitely taken ideas from those, but they still lack some of the dynamism that's required, and also they just don't tend to look far enough into the future. But you know, like there are means of doing it. There is value to be taken from working within a spreadsheet rather than using like a dedicated platform for something like this. So like anything that where you can look at how conversion rates staying the same versus increasing, for example, like to keep going with that one, that I think is powerful. I think that tells a story that gives you a sense of like, okay, well, if this happens, we can plan for this, we can do that, we can make these arrangements. Whereas if you're just saying, all right, the year's going to go like this, and then the year doesn't go like that, you're looking at those numbers and you're just watching that gap between expected revenue and actual revenue just open up over time.
Yeah.
And you're already too late to solve it. As soon as you start noticing it, it's already too late.
Yeah, that's typically how it is, isn't it? By the time you know you've got a problem, it's probably too late. Always be proactive, absolutely. Well, look, we're almost out of time, Craig. It's been great having you on, but we do have a bit of tradition where we ask one final question, which is in your career, in sales or developing go-to-market strategies, what's your best memory today?
My best memory today. Okay. So it was probably my first ever deal that I ever closed. It's kind of a generic answer, but like I was actually working in Paris at the time. I was an SDR, and I got given this upsell project, and it was the first time I ever had the opportunity to earn commission. And like I'm not like super like, you know, kind of money driven person or anything like that. It was more like the thrill of it. And a lot of these renewals were US based companies. I was in Paris at the time, and so I stayed late into the evening. And this is like, you know, I had like a proper old school phone, like smile and dial kind of job. And I thought I was alone in the office. It was 8:30. I called some customer on the West Coast in the States, asked him about like if he wanted to upgrade his plan with us. And it was like, I didn't even prep for it really. I was just like, yeah, do you want to upgrade? And he was like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. I did my pitch, hung up the phone, and then like I was like so euphorically happy. And then from around the corner comes the co-founder of the whole company. I didn't know he was there. And he like comes in, gives me a high five, gives me this big hug, says like, that was amazing, congratulations. And like it was just a moment like between the two of us. And like this guy now is like super successful. You know, that company is basically a unicorn now. And he's still there. He's still, you know, sort of very involved in the business. And like to have had that moment was like so cool. And like it's that feeling, you know, that feeling is why you do what you do. And that was probably it. I always think back to that, and I always chase that feeling.
Awesome. Amazing. Well, look, it's been great having you on. This has been the Revenue Revolution podcast, sponsored by Jointflows. Until next time, thank you, Craig.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. See you later.
Yeah.